Good morning. Thank you for joining this morning. Yes, here to provide some insights, some top tips potentially around sustainable travel, and particularly looking at it through the lens of employee wellbeing. Just for context, Mobilityways, we're an organisation that's a leader in transport decarbonisation, with a particular focus on supporting workplaces advance sustainable travel. Okay, so let's get into it. So, important to set the context, and I don't want to, make people too sad on a Wednesday morning, but in a couple of hours' time, we've gone through the hump, and it's on towards the weekend, a long weekend as well. So, bear with for a couple of minutes in terms of perhaps some of the tougher things to appreciate. So, clearly that climate change is here, it's apparent, it's impacting us all, it's impacting globally. I could have picked any pictures. There's something new every day happening somewhere in the world. But I think the important part also to reflect on is the fact how this is impacting in terms of physical well-being across all life stages. So it's having a huge impact. It's just after 10 o'clock in the morning. I would have played this video, but there's perhaps a few choice words in it that perhaps aren't perfect for first thing in the morning. So if you want to see this one, Nish Kumar, look up Nish Kumar, Climate Science Translated. It's an excellent couple of minute video that just talks about where we are with climate change. But I just love this. As a lighter touch, I just wanted to put this into here to sort of say, look, where there used to be clouds, now we've made it into a sort of Rottweiler on steroids who wants to chew everyone's head off. So have a look at that. It's very useful little context and a reminder of why you're on the webinar today and how it's so important that we educate and make advances in sustainable travel. And I think also I touched on physical well-being. Let's not forget mental well-being, and this is particularly acute within younger generations, so children, younger people. And there's some quite worrying stats there in terms of respondents being worried about climate change, feeling powerless, helpless, guilty. Obviously, this is manifesting itself across all life stages, but I think it's really important for us to reflect on this, particularly as everybody on the call today is representing a business or an organization, and people who are feeling this right now, they are the future. They are going to be our future employees. So how are we as an organization responding to this concern, this helplessness, and perhaps positioning ourselves as an organization that is combating this, that is trying to do something? So that's the toughest, if you like, slides of the day. Into the challenge. So we're talking about sustainable travel. We're talking about it in a well-being context, how to fix a problem like transport. Again, important to just reflect a little bit in terms of what's going on with transport. So domestically, so looking at it, we're obviously starting off looking a little bit global. Let's dive into the UK. Domestic transport, as you can see from this slide, it in terms of its impact, in terms of its proportion of the overall footprint of the country, it's decreased the least since 1990 and actually increased the most based on this data. Now, actually, there's some important things to reflect on here. You can actually see that actually there is some good news stories in here. Between 1990 and 2022, we have actually reduced the total emission footprint of the UK by 50%, and that's largely been driven by you can see by electricity and fuel supply. But domestic transport is around 28% of the entire footprint, and it's really stubborn. We're not making much progress on it. And actually, latest data has just come out, and you can see that it's actually growing by a small amount. So we've gone from 28 to 29%. So it's approaching a position where it's accounting for almost a third of our entire footprint, and obviously our trips are a composite part of that. I think also important, but we've got electric cars. They're going to sort us out because, of course, they're zero tailpipe. Well, yes, it's an important part. It's a part of the jigsaw that gets us to a place where emissions are falling, and we are playing our part in terms of trying to keep climate rising above 1.5%. But as you can see from this slide, there was the dip, as we all know, from COVID, and we are gradually moving ourselves back into a position where we will reach emissions that were at levels we haven't seen since 2019. That is happening, and I think the other important part to reflect on is, whilst electric cars are being added into the car park, even by 2035, we're at a place where actually only probably about half of the vehicles on the road are electric. So ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles, obviously petrol and diesel, are still going to be here for many years to come. So actually, we've really got to think about, this isn't a silver bullet. We've got to reduce carbon in different ways. As I described there, electrification is important, but it's not going to get us to where we need to get to fast enough, nor actually does it actually solve problems with air quality. So whilst it might be emitting zero tailpipe emissions, there are concerns around air quality. It's not just about CO2, it's about particulate matter as well. These heavy vehicles, they're going through tyres, and there's a lot of particulate matter associated with that, which has an impact on air quality. And the other part of this is, if we all swap out our electric vehicles, our petrol and diesel vehicles for electric vehicles, we're doing nothing to combat congestion. Congestion associated with air quality is a real problem. We are seeing across the country road network speeds reducing, which has an impact on us all, has a massive impact on productivity. And obviously the whole message right now for the country and indeed the world is growth. So if we've got roads that are getting slower and slower, that's not helping with productivity. And actually, beyond how they've worsened right now, they're forecast to get even worse. There isn't a single model right now that doesn't point towards increasing congestion on our roads, and we see it every day. Even though there's lots of hybrid working, actually every time we go out on the roads, we probably all feel that, wow, these roads are really busy. And I think it's really important as well to, there's a right paradox going on here, because the roads are really busy, cars are everywhere, and yet they're used so little of the time. Private cars are used just 4% of the time. So when they're not driving around, they're occupying a lot of space that could otherwise be put to better use. If we think about, sustainable travel in all its forms, the mobility hierarchy, active travel, walking, wheeling, into public transport, into shared use of vehicles. Vehicles that are parked up all the time are congesting our environment all of the time. So I mentioned at the beginning that we're an organisation that really focuses on commuting. Within that, commuting is actually something that, and I think the important part with looking at transport and how do we reduce the carbon impact of domestic transport is really getting into the specifics of why people travel, where are people going to and from. And the commute is the single largest use case. Yes, when you start to aggregate up things such as leisure trips and shopping trips, you get to a larger number. But as a single use case, 19% of all trips are associated with the travel to and from work. And as we will appreciate, outside of perhaps London, small pockets perhaps of central Birmingham, central Manchester, our major cities, Glasgow, etc., single occupancy vehicle, SOV, is the dominant mode. What we need as a country is to get more people to use their own car less. We need to get higher HOV, higher occupancy vehicle rates, but particularly when it comes to the commute, because of the way that we travel, the way that we've been kind of accustomed and locked into car dependency very often, vehicle occupancy on the commute is literally just over 1.1, and actually has come down a little bit as a consequence of perhaps some nervousness that still hasn't fully exited the system as a result of COVID. We really need to get to a place, if we're going to make impacts in terms of congestion, we need to get to a place where the occupancy rates, particularly at commute times, so those peak times at the start of the day and at the end of the day, are much closer to 2. And what does this all mean? there is huge amounts of capacity, and this is half the problem. We've got lots and lots of people traveling in and out of places of work with at least 3 seats available in their vehicle. So every single day there are millions of empty seats on that could be being put to use by others. And as you can see from the bottom bullet point, single occupancy vehicle travel accounts for 4/5 of our entire total commuting emissions. So it's huge, and there's something that we can do about it. Something to consider when considering how you advance sustainable travel within an organization is to perhaps not overweight the sustainability piece. Think about some of the other angles. This is oftentimes when the companies that we work with, who are typically large organizations, there is a sustainability aspect to this, but actually the reason that the company will work for us is because they've tied it to operational opportunity or potentially constraint. So opportunity, how can I help my employees save money? Typically, traveling more sustainably to work means that an employee can save money. And at a time where cost of living, remains high. I was just reading this morning, inflation is still high, and it's causing challenges in terms of whether or not interest rates can come down. We've got obviously geopolitical activity happening across the globe right now, which is causing a lot of concern. But cost of living, it's here, it's persistent. How the tackling the commute and recognizing how people might travel in a different way can potentially save people money. We're talking obviously about well-being later. We're making the big connection with well-being as well today. Another big one for organizations is recruitment and retention. We talk oftentimes about inclusion, and within inclusion tends to kind of drift off into a diversity discussion, which is absolutely important. But inclusion should also consider mobility. Around 20% of people can't or don't drive for a variety of reasons. It could be that they're young and haven't even started to learn to drive. It could be that they have no wish to drive. It could be that a disability prevents them from driving, or at some point, which has come to light right from birth, or is something that has been picked up in later life. But if we've got 20% of the population, and right now, obviously, again, with the growth story for the country, there's a massive need and requirement to raise productivity to allow people who perhaps aren't as productive as we would like to get into a work environment. If transport is a problem for them, if they're looking at jobs and going, okay, maybe I could do that job, going onto Google Maps and then looking about how they might get there. Oh, actually, I can't get there, it's too difficult. If that is a barrier, then from an inclusion perspective, we need to find ways to overcome that. Okay, so we talked about the problem. We talked about the need to get more people to use their own car less. So let's look at it from a solution perspective, how to actually fix the problem like transport. So I've mentioned Mobilityways. We offer quite a comprehensive framework for organizations around measurement, reduction, and reporting. Lots of things that we do, but actually, what I wanted to describe today is actually, whilst there are frameworks such as this, you can actually take essences of this framework and do them to yourself. So typically, we're working with companies who would have 500 employees plus. As an example, we work with Heathrow. They have 70,000 employees at Heathrow. But the basis and the foundation of what we deliver can be taken down to a company of any size. And that's what I wanted to kind of provide a little bit more information about today. Measurement, the first part of the process: measure, reduce, report. So in terms of measurement, two really important things to be looking at, both actual and potential. Actual is baselining how it is today, and typically done through a travel survey. I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. From the potential side, a really good thing to look at is postcode analysis. So let's tackle both of these at once. So in terms of the travel survey, this is obviously helping you understand how today people are traveling. So really important aspects of a travel survey to ensure that not only you understand the modal split, but actually be able to then create your own baseline in terms of what that means in terms of carbon, it's important that you have three key questions within the survey. The mode, so how do you usually travel to work? What is the mode that you're using? The frequency. Obviously, things have changed significantly since COVID in terms of hybrid working, but that's not the case for every organisation. It depends on the sector, depends on how that business operates. We're obviously actually seeing right now quite a lot of emphasis on return to office across a lot of our clients, but frequency, that's important. And then obviously the duration, how far are people travelling? With those three key bits of information, you don't need to ask anything more, but that will allow you as an organization, doesn't matter what size you are, to understand the position as it is today. Now the good news is, we're talking about this from a West Midlands perspective. So Transport for West Midlands actually have some pretty good resources available for organisations to use free of charge. So there is, I've identified a travel survey template. Now, these are the questions that broadly align with those mode, frequency and duration piece that I've talked about. I would suggest if you really want to do this properly, you wouldn't do it based on ranges, because then how do you actually establish, how do you attach greenhouse gas emission calculations to that? I'd make it probably a little bit simpler, but the essence of it is there. It's a 3-page survey that then gets into questions around how might individuals travel to work. Now, an important part to consider around that, so there's the part which is to help you to understand definitively how people are traveling and the associated carbon footprint. There is another side to ask some qualitative questions about how people might travel. Now, a word of caution when asking those types of questions: if you have a workforce that are predominantly driving to work, to and from place of work on their own, asking them questions about would you consider using the bus? Would you consider cycling? Would you consider using the train? You may get some positive responses. You might not, because there's obviously quite a lot of bias associated with driving, in the sense of, well, why would I pay for a train when I have a car? Because the car loan's not going away. I still need my car. Why would I cycle? I don't have a bike. I'd have to go and buy a bike. I've got a car that I'm already paying for, so why would I incur additional expense? So just be mindful, if you do start asking questions about how people might travel, you might not get the responses that you want. That in itself is not a bad thing, but it's just a word of caution. Which is why postcode analysis is actually probably a better route in terms of understanding the potential for people to travel. So rather than asking people how they might travel and getting a mixed bag of responses back, take that out of the equation and just look at what is the options available to people. We do this in quite a sophisticated manner for large organisations through a tool called Commute. It's origin and destination based. It's looking at the start time. It's really building out, again, for large organisations with 500 plus employees, a real visual picture of what they might do and the cohorts of people which they then might influence to change their ways. But great news is there's lots of tools out there where you can do this for free. It's called journey planning. And whether you use things such as, again, Transport for West Midlands have a journey planner that's available on their website, or you're using things like Citymapper, or you're using Google Maps. It doesn't really matter. But getting that sense of specific origin and destination and start time, and exploring those options with your workforce is really important. It's part of that, it's part of the promotion. And actually, I'd say, one thing to really maybe think about is actually, how do I start this conversation? It's a great conversation starter with individuals. Potentially, it could be something that you made part of the appraisal process. So as part of ongoing discussions, how are, looking at how someone might travel to work and how they might travel differently. And this isn't being anti-car. This isn't saying, we've identified that you could be cycling to work. This is not reaching a point that suddenly says, right, from Monday, please cycle. It's about seeing how cycling could be integrated into their lives. So perhaps maybe cycling once a week, something like that. Okay, so we talked about measurement. We talked about the importance of travel surveys. We talked the importance of understanding from a journey planning perspective how people might travel. Then your introduction. With that data, you can start to make some interventions. Interventions, and probably it will require some incentivization because we're talking about behaviors here. If an organization wants to embrace and advance sustainable travel, it needs to bring the workforce with him. So that tends to require win-wins. So let's look at this a little bit more, a little deeper. So again, a tool that we would provide to large companies, I think we did about 500,000 of these last year, is personal travel plans. Now, these are delivered individually to people. It's part of that education, carbon literacy type project. Again, if we just flick back to where we were with journey planning, it kind of does the same thing. Might not be exactly the same, but again, the journey planner can be an important part of understanding options and actually being something that can be then used further in terms of discussions around where you go from there. Again, just so you're aware, in terms of interventions, there's a whole load of business support available from Transport for West Midlands. I've found assets in terms of planning journeys to work. There's the templates that we've already discussed. They actually have discounted ticketing options as well. So maybe have a look at those and see what the rules and regulations are around that. And active travel, really important. There's lots of good guidance and linkages to active travel support. Just to point out a couple of things here, it talks about the fact that a 20-minute walk or wheel can have fantastic health benefits. I think that is really, really important. And I think actually don't just take Transport for West Midlands view on this, take the World Health Organization's view on this. Demonstrated health benefits from commuter cycling, so really specifically considering that commuter cycling include a reduction in all-cause mortality, the risk of dementia, some forms of cancer, type 2 diabetes, as well as improvements in mental and physical health. I would encourage all organizations, if they're not having that conversation with their staff about this specific part of active travel, where it makes sense for people to do it. And that's actually an important part, because if you're establishing that there potentially is a bus route for somebody to take the bus to work as opposed to driving, don't forget that incorporated into a bus trip is active travel, because of course somebody's got to walk, get from their home to the bus stop, and from a bus stop to the place of work, and that could be 10-15 minutes a day, in which case actually you're really getting to a place where you're supporting them on active travel, even if they're then taking the bus. So it's an important part of this education process. I talked about the mobility hierarchy, active travel, public transport, shared use of vehicles, where somebody lives in a place where it isn't suitable for them to use other modes. They perhaps live a far distance away, so actually it's just going to take too long trying to do it in other modes. Carpooling. How can your organization organize themselves a little bit better so that actually people are getting to this place of this higher occupancy vehicle levels that we're looking for in terms of commute? We run LiftShare. LiftShare is the largest carpooling platform in the UK. Incredibly, it's 25 years old. We run it as a social enterprise, amongst other ways, but this is available free to use for all. So if you have staff who perhaps, maybe you're a slightly bigger organization and you don't quite know who might be able to share with each other, ask them to use LiftShare. Create an account, add a journey. Actually, it will start to show them where they have some matches. And again, we can provide assets for these type of things to support that piece, but member stories is a great thing. Saving money, the enjoyment part. Again, there's a massive well-being aspect to carpooling that's sometimes underplayed, because of course what you're seeing here is that connection with a colleague. So if somebody's had a bad day at work, what happens when they get in the car? They continue to have a bad day, and that continues all the way home, and into the front door. If they're carpooling with somebody, there is that opportunity for it actually to switch out. what are you going to be doing tonight, how are the kids, all these kind of things come to light straight away, and actually can have a massive impact on people. So yeah, really think about carpooling. How can you embed that within your organization and within regions? Definitely, I'm not sure where everybody's based, but obviously we're talking about West Midlands, we're talking about various councils. We provide free landing pages for councils to be able to promote carpooling across their regions. So again, if you're not seeing or feeling that there's enough being done by your local area to support carpooling, perhaps have a word with the council and put them my way. If you are a large organisation, again, not knowing exactly who's on the call today, we can then deliver branded schemes. So we've got Lift Share, which is entirely free for anybody to use. We also run closed schemes, more of a commercial model, where there's a license fee applies for large organisations. So it's about really driving targeted carpooling within an organisation. The benefit for the organisation is not only is it supporting that kind of connection between employees, but actually they're getting a lot of data as well. So they're getting data to evidence that they are making improvements with their own carbon footprint, CO2 savings, mileage savings, and money savings. Enough of that. So measure, reduce, and then into report. The key aspect here is a commitment to remeasure. So if you are doing travel surveys, make it part of an annual process. Commit to doing this each year and taking guidance from the results that you're getting. Share successes. Where there are successes happening, get that disseminated through the organisation, and look for ways to continually improve as an organisation. Okay, so some final takeaways really. This whole linkage between travel and employee wellbeing, hopefully what I've described today gives you further fuel in terms of the connections that can be made and the opportunities that exist. Obviously, we're talking about change. Making change of any sort within an organisation demands effort, more so when we're talking about individual behaviours that need altering. Talking about this purely on a sustainability grounds is difficult. It will certainly resonate with some, but it won't resonate with all. So look to other levers, look to ways. So obviously we're talking about the linkages to well-being, but look at it from the perspective of financial, which in itself actually could be a well-being aspect. If somebody's struggling financially, look, if you were to share your lift with somebody, even some part of the week, you will save money. That might actually be useful for you. So think about it from the financial, the societal, personal health and well-being perspective, and as an organisation, how am I considering this from an operational perspective? Could this help me with recruitment and retention? Is this going to make me an organisation that people are going to want to join? Make use of free resources. Obviously, hopefully from what I've described today, you can see that there are things that you can do pretty easily yourselves. So there's great resources available, obviously from Transport for West Midlands, but again, via the Thrive team who are, creating this environmental impact module. So you can take that forward as well. Something that's really important. Actually, I've kind of left this one perhaps a little bit too close to the end. Join up with others. If you're an organisation that perhaps only has 25 or 50 people, and you're thinking, well, I can't really have much of an impact. Well, there's a piece about your own personal impact, and if you can tackle some sustainable travel within your organisation, hopefully that then bleeds into individuals' personal lives. If they're starting to make better choices around how they travel to work, does this then drip off into how they then consider their leisure and shopping trips? But the big part is you're not alone. You're likely to be an organisation that sits next to another organisation. So a lot of work that we do is with industrial and business parks. If you're in one of those locations, you might be 25 employees, but there might be 10, 20 other organisations like you. And this is about like working out how people within that vicinity can support each other to embrace sustainable travel. So really have a think about that in terms of opportunities to talk to others. We're asking you to talk to your own workforce, but actually talk to other workforces too. And last but not least, get started. Top bullet point. This is tough, but get started. Get some information, get some measurements so you can start that conversation within your organisation and make some progress on that basis.